Hello, my dear viewers. This amazing story will be very instructive for you. It is very interesting and beautiful. I wish you enjoy watching it. Wrapped in a woolen white scarf, Valentina walked leisurely through the snow-covered alleys of the old city cemetery. In her hands, the woman firmly clutched a bouquet of 6 white roses. These flowers were meant for her loved ones. 2 to her son, 2 to her mother-in-law, and the remaining pair for her beloved husband, Michael, who had recently passed away. "It's been 40 days since you've been with me," she mentally said to her late husband. "How unfair, how cruel of you. Why did you leave me alone to live out my life? After all, you promised once that you and I will always be together, and now I am left alone." It was like they were from different planets, and the two were so different from each other, and yet something had bound them together for years. What was it, if not love? It was this strong feeling that united the spouses, and they were together, in spite of all the conventions and the long opposition of the mother-in-law. Michael was born into an upper-class family. His father had once worked for the government, but had been dead for several years. And Elaine's widowed mother was an art historian known in small circles. Michael had just turned 20 that memorable summer. A long-necked, skinny pedagogical student, he was spending his hot days in the country. The fact was that Elaine had decided to renovate her apartment and to avoid the inconvenience of the undertaking. Mother and son had temporarily moved to the country house. In August, the repairs were nearing completion, and one morning the parents sent Michael to New York. The young man's purpose was simple: to check on the repairs and make arrangements with the painters to have the windows washed and the basic debris cleaned. As a rule, Elaine preferred to do this sort of thing herself, adhering to the rule: if you want it done well, do it yourself. She liked to be in control of everything. But on that day, a very famous Orientalist professor was going to visit her, and there was no way the woman could postpone the scheduled meeting. Michael gladly accepted his mother's request. He was tired of being stuck in the wilderness. He wanted to go home, to the city, to his friends, to the hustle and bustle of the city, to the hustle and bustle of the city, to the television after all. The front door to the apartment was covered with cellophane film, and there were miniature white footprints imprinted on the doormat by the door. All this clearly hinted that repairs were in progress. The door was ajar. From the apartment came the loud, melodic sounds of the radio. Men's voices, in an incomprehensible language, were singing something upbeat. Michael stepped quietly into the hallway and saw right in front of him a young girl in black sweatpants, rolled up to her knees. She was wearing only a beige bra, which emphasized the voluminous breasts. "Oh," cried the girl painter, immediately covering her cleavage with her hands. Her round, pretty face was flushed with shame, which was visible even under the white whitewash powder. The pretty blonde looked about 18 or 19 years old. "I'm sorry. I wasn't expecting strangers. It's just very hot in the apartment," she explained, and hurriedly retreated to the kitchen. "And I'm not a stranger. I'm the owner," Michael answered. He tried to be important, though in fact he was embarrassed in front of the girl himself. "It's okay now," the girl shouted from the kitchen after a couple of minutes. When Michael came in, the girl was already wearing a short floral linen sundress. It looked good on the girl. "I'm sorry about that again," she repeated embarrassedly. "It was so embarrassing." "No, it's you. I'm sorry. It was my fault. I should have knocked first," Michael said in turn. The young man held out his hand to the girl. "My name is Michael. What's yours?" The girl looked at her hand, stained with whitewash, wiped it several times on her sundress, and shook his outstretched hand. "And I'm Valentina." There was an awkward pause. Afterward, the painter gave Michael a tour of the apartment, demonstrating the fruits of her hard work. "And what kind of wallpaper do you like better? The solid-colored ones in the hallway or the floral ones in the bedroom?" she asked. "And this one in rhombuses in the living room is very original, isn't it?" Michael nodded knowingly, even though he knew nothing about renovation or interior design. Frankly, he was indifferent to the whole thing. Then Valentina took him to the bathroom. "What do you think of the new toilet? And the ceramic tiles? It's so shiny. Do you like it?" she asked. Then Valentina showed the whitewashed ceilings in the kitchen and the new, smooth linoleum on the floor, and was so sincerely pleased, as if it was not someone else's apartment but her own. "You must be tired from the trip," Valentina said. "You must be tired from the trip, mustn't you? Would you like some coffee? I'll make it right away, or some lemonade on the rocks." "Really, I'm thirsty as hell. Lemonade would be nice," the young man nodded. Valentina and Michael sat down on the kitchen sofa, covered with foil, and began to drink ice-cold lemonade in silence. At that moment, a fat, older woman with a sullen, discontented face entered the kitchen. "Why are you here?" she mumbled, furrowing her brow. "I told your mother it would be 4 days at least. I told your mother it would be another 4 days at least." "This is Evelyn, my aunt," Valentina explained hastily. It was obvious that the girl was uncomfortable for her disrespectful relative, "and I didn't come here for nothing. I'm actually here on business," Michael said, somewhat confused. Evelyn looked haughtily at the master's son with an undisguised sneer. "Mom asked you to clean more windows and take out the trash," Michael said. "It's not part of our services," Evelyn said. Michael immediately reached into his pocket and handed the woman the money. Evelyn's bushy black eyebrows went up in surprise. Won't lift a finger for this pittance," she insulted. "Come on, Auntie. Why are you angry?" Valentina came into the conversation. "Don't you think we've got a window on good people?" "Good people pay accordingly," Evelyn said angrily. "You can do what you want, but I'm not going to slave for that kind of money." The older woman gave Michael an icy look in her small, sharp eyes. Then she left, slamming the front door loudly. "Please don't be offended by her," Valentina excused herself. "She's not a bad woman. Her son was just a bad son who had been foolishly thrown in jail recently. That's why Aunt Evelyn takes it out on everybody, nervous, worried." Finally discouraged, Michael waved his hand. "I'm not offended. By the way, I have to run some errands now. I'll be gone until tonight." He spent the day driving around town, visiting a friend who had just returned from France and recounting an unforgettable vacation. Then Michael had lunch at the diner, and in the evening, when the summer heat subsided, he returned to his apartment. It was quiet inside. All the tape covering the furniture was gone. The windows were shiny and the trash was neatly stacked in large bags. Michael walked quietly into the living room and saw Valentina, who sitting up was dozing in an armchair. Somehow, she seemed incredibly attractive to the young man. He longed to touch her with his hand, to feel her soft, smooth maiden body with his fingers, and better yet, to kiss her plump lips. But instead, Michael, after standing there indecisively for a few minutes, only coughed delicately to indicate his presence. The girl immediately opened her eyes. "I'm sorry, I'm exhausted. I sat down for a minute to rest, but I must have dozed off." "But now that you're home, I'll be getting ready," Valentina said. "There's not much left to do in the apartment. The skirting board's in the kitchen and a few other small things I think we can manage tomorrow." Michael pulled out a bottle of red wine that a friend had given him. "Why don't you stay and keep me company? Why should I drink alone like some alcoholic? And anyway, why do you have to go at night? Especially since I have to be back in the morning. There's plenty of room in the apartment." "We'll settle down somehow," he offered me out of the blue. "You think so, don't you?" Valentina was relieved, filled with joy. "To tell you the truth, I'm too tired to do anything. My legs ached. It's a long way to the train station, and it takes about 40 minutes by electric train." "Well, all the more reason to stay," Michael exclaimed. He searched for a long time in the kitchen for a corkscrew, found it not without difficulty, and poured the wine into glasses. The refrigerator was practically empty, and there was not much to snack on. So Valentina and Michael quickly became tipsy, both from the alcohol and the air in the apartment. Valentina asked permission to take a shower, while Michael staggered back to his parents' bedroom to make the sheets for his guests. But as it turned out, he found himself and Valentina on the natural mahogany double bed, the object of Elena's eternal pride. The young people spent that night together. They were inexperienced in love affairs. Yet Michael felt like a real man and a hero lover next to Valentina. It was incredibly easy for him with this girl. There was no awkwardness, no stiffness, and no shyness whatsoever. Everything was very natural and easy, as if it was not the first time for them. It was not until dawn that the young people fell asleep. I woke up to the sound of someone banging on the front door. "Valentina, did you fall asleep?" "Come on, open up," said Aunt Evelyn with a cry of anger. The girl jumped up in horror, hastily pulled on her sundress and rushed to open it. The shrewd Evelyn took one look at her disheveled, looking niece to see what was going on. "I see," she nodded longingly and then chuckled. "You're a bright girl, aren't you? Not a bad girl. And you pretended to be so quiet. But it's a piece you can't handle, girl. You ain't your bird, and you ain't your bird, and you ain't flying together. Mistress will have you down in no time." Valentina was frightened out of her wits and trembled like an aspen leaf in the wind. "Is my aunt going to tell Elaine everything?" She was worried, and Michael didn't seem to care. He looked at the troubled Valentine and admired her beauty, her smooth, round hips, her large breasts, her strong legs, her soft blonde hair, and her snub nose studded with freckles. This girl was so unlike his familiar female classmates. There was a special rare beauty about her, soft, simple, so understandable and gentle. Valentina was warm and comfortable near him. The women had been tinkering, touching up and cleaning up all day long. Michael kept out of their way and kept a sneaky glance at Valentine all day. He was loath to go back to the country house. He wished more than anything in the world that his aunt had gone away and left him alone with his niece again. But Evelyn was in no hurry to leave and stayed until the evening. About 7 o'clock in the evening, a woman called Michael from the corridor. The young man came out and saw them wearing makeup and clothes. "Leaving already? I'm sorry to hear that," he said. "Yes," smirked Evelyn. "And tomorrow, have your mother come. The work must be accepted." Michael nodded at a loss. Valentine stood across the hall, eyes downcast with embarrassment, nervously fidgeting with her purse. He felt an urge to stop her, to hold her, to grab her hand and ask her not to leave him. But he was ashamed to show his feelings in front of strangers. He was ashamed to admit it, but he was somewhat afraid of the girl's sarcastic aunt. At last they parted. Evelyn and Valentina left the apartment. Upset, Michael went to the kitchen to drink iced tea and blame himself for his cowardice. But 10 minutes later there was a knock at the door. Michael opened the door with joyful anticipation. His expectations were not deceived. Standing in front of him on the threshold was Valentina. She was embarrassed and shifted from foot to foot. How happy he was at this moment. Valentine had returned. That meant she cared about him too. And once again, the beautiful night was over. They were exhausted and lay curled up on the crumpled sheets, pressed against each other. Valentina told Michael about her life, which was far from easy. Valentina's parents had died early when she was a baby. Her mother had died of childbirth fever, and her father 6 months later had frozen to death in a snowdrift while driving home from a nearby town, drunk. And from then on, Valentina lived in the old house with her grandparents. They lived more than modestly. The grandfather and grandmother received a meager pension and barely made ends meet. An old man had to support himself, but there was a teenager who needed clothes and shoes. That is why Valentina started earning her own money at the age of 15. She was hired as a trainee in a team of painters and plasterers. Then she got a job at a construction site for a miserable wage. It was very hard for a very young girl at a construction site. The pay was low, the more so she constantly had to fend off the ambiguous hints of men. So when her Aunt Evelyn's cunning aunt called her in to work with her, doing repairs on apartments and private houses, she immediately agreed. The job was also far from sugar-coated. After all, sometimes there were picky clients. They shook their hearts out before paying. Nevertheless, Valentina did not complain about her life and treated everything philosophically. "What's the point of grumbling against fate? To each his own," she said. "I guess that's my karma." The next day, Valentina went to her home, and Michael went to the country house. There he gave his mother a detailed report on the progress of the repairs, and then went to his room, where he thought long and hard about Valentina. He himself could not understand why this simple and uneducated girl had attracted him. But there was something about her that pulled and called out to his soul and body. "I wonder if she's thinking about me too," he worried. The young man remembered Valentina's soft, pleasant, rounded body, her gentle hands and eyes, so faithful and trusting. And more than anything, he wanted to see her as soon as possible. In the morning, Eileen had gone into town, and in the evening she returned, indignant at the shoddy repairs. She scolded that slutty Evelyn and her crooked assistant. Nothing was right or wrong for her. The same case of the cranky customer Valentina was talking about, Michael thought to himself. All this was very unpleasant for him to hear. After all, it was about a girl he was not indifferent to. The next morning he left for New York. He lied to his mother that he had urgent business concerning his studies. In fact, he spent the whole day on the phone waiting for Valentina to call, cursing himself for not asking for her address or number. At lunchtime, Michael's friends called him to go to the movies, but he refused, even though the movie promised to be very interesting, and he really wanted to see it. But how could he leave the apartment in case Valentina called at the same time? But Valentina did not make herself known. But in the evening, Iris, a former classmate who had just returned from Hawaii, called. She had talked at length and colorfully about her unforgettable vacation, especially about how men had been all over her. And then Iris suggested that Michael meet her. He politely declined, citing busyness. Then Iris boldly hinted that her parents had gone to relatives and left her home alone. "I will spend the whole night alone in the bedroom," Iris said languidly and with a gasp. Not long ago, Michael would have run to her after those words, but not now. Iris was pretty good, looking tall, slender. And after the summer vacation, she must have been tanned, and even prettier. But now, no one was interested in Michael except Valentina. Iris was perplexed. She had almost openly offered to spend the night together, but he refused. Then an offended Iris called him names and hung up on him. But he was not offended at her former classmate. Let her think what she wanted of him. He had a very different question on his mind. What if we never see Valentina again? He thought, frightened and went crazy with uncertainty. The girl called only 2 days later. Michael was over the moon. Even though he told Valentina off for her long silence, the young people met in the city center. They strolled through Central Park, and then Michael walked her to the bus station. Soon summer was over, and classes at the university began. Lectures, seminars, tests took a lot of time and energy. Still, every day after school, Michael rushed to another meeting with Valentina. Sometimes they sat in restaurants or, holding hands, walked in the park. But more often the lovers would come to Michael's empty country house, where no one could prevent them from loving each other with awe and delight. This went on until the beginning of winter, when the cold weather began. The heater couldn't handle such cold weather. The house couldn't get warm, and it became completely impossible to go there. This upset the lovers, but they were not discouraged. And after Christmas, a distraught Valentine unexpectedly told Michael that she was pregnant. It took him by surprise. "Are you sure?" He asked. "Yes," the girl nodded. "The doctor at the Women's Health Center confirmed my fears today. It's 7 to 8 weeks, and I have no idea what to do. I'm really scared, Michael." Could you find me a good doctor to get me an abortion before it's too late? Michael, too, was confused and blamed himself for the indiscretion that had caused the accident. He had no female doctor he knew, and the only person he could turn to on such a sensitive matter was his mother. She had plenty of connections in all sorts of circles, from carpenters to antique dealers. There must have been a good gynecologist among them. But how could he approach his parent with such a delicate problem? It's okay, Valentina reassured him the next day. I found a doctor through a friend of mine who will take care of the matter at the end of the week. The young man was relieved at first that everything was going to work out so well for them. But then the feeling of relief was replaced by anguish of conscience. He thought that he was acting like a coward in this situation. You do something wrong, and then you run for the hills. What kind of a man am I if I can't take responsibility for my own actions? He thought critically and determined to rectify the situation radically. In the morning, Michael bought a modest bouquet of white roses and went to meet Valentina. Will you marry me? He asked. Of course, yes. The girl exclaimed joyfully and with tears of happiness threw herself on her lover's neck. She did not want to worry him and was afraid to admit how scared she was to go for an abortion. Now a mountain was lifted from her shoulders. She looked at Michael as if he had saved her life. He was as if he had saved her life. He was proud of himself, and his cheeks were puffed up with self-importance. He seemed to have done everything right, but there remained the most important thing, to inform about the imminent marriage of his mother and how to do it delicately and correctly. He had no idea, but it was impossible to postpone a serious conversation. Neither was it possible to backtrack. So plucking up the courage one evening, Michael sat his mother down on the sofa and asked her not to worry. After these words, which should have reassured Elaine, the woman, on the contrary, went to her heels. Did you get kicked out of the university? Did she grab her heart? No. The studies are all right, her son assured her. What happened then? Michael took a deep breath and blurted it out. I'm getting married soon because my beloved girl is in a pregnant state. Is this some kind of bad joke? Elena asked, swallowing nervously. She refused to believe that what her son had said was true. No, Mom, it's not a joke, Michael answered. It's more than serious, and by next fall, I'll be a father and you'll be a grandmother. Elena almost fainted from such a statement. She gestured for a sedative and, after regaining consciousness, asked who her son's chosen one was. Do I even know her? I hope your fiancé comes from a family in our circle. Is it your classmate Iris? The woman questioned. No, Iris has nothing to do with it. My girlfriend's name is Valentina, and you know her. She's Evelyn's partner, who's been renovating our house recently, Michael answered with a gasp. What did you say? Evelyn's partner. You got the plasterer pregnant. My mother raised her eyebrows in surprise. Yes, he confirmed. Are you out of your mind? Elena exclaimed. Do you even hear what you're saying? No, you're crazy to bring a handyman into our house. What were you thinking, having an affair with her? What am I going to tell people? All our acquaintances, friends, colleagues. How will I present this Valentina? How lucky your father didn't live to see this day. And for what sins did heaven send such a punishment? Mom, please, don't be so dramatic. Nothing fatal happened. Valentine is a very nice girl and very well brought up, even if she is a country girl, said Michael. I'm sure you will like her, too, once you get to know her. You're such an idiot, Eleni shouted in annoyance. She tricked you like an unintelligent boy. She saw our lavishly furnished apartment. She went from pawns to queens in bed. And you fell for it, you sucker. No, you're wrong. That's not who Valentina is. Michael protested, raising his voice to his mother for the first time. When we get married, I'm going to bring her into our house. You'll see for yourself. After assessing the magnitude of the impending catastrophe, Elaine stated categorically, That will never happen. We'll see about that, Michael said and went to his room, slamming the door loudly. The woman was left alone on the couch, completely bewildered. It seemed to her that life was slipping away. Everything was unthinkable. Her only beloved son, a well-mannered, obedient boy who had never spoken a word against her, had declared war against her. She, in turn, boycotted him and stopped talking to him. But Michael didn't care about his mother's quirks. He was occupied only his beloved and their unborn child. Every day he met with Valentina. They took walks together in the fresh air in the park. After all, such walks are good for the health of the mother and the fetus. Then the lovers would go to the diner, where Michael would buy Vala double burgers, and then watch with amusement as the pregnant woman ate them up to her cheeks. "We'll probably have a boy," Valentina once remarked. "In our part of the world, they say that if you have a craving for sweets, you'll have a girl. I have a craving for meat, and that's a sure sign that we'll have an heir." "A boy is a boy," Michael nodded. Basically, he didn't care who was born, as long as everything with his mother was settled as soon as possible. He was not a conflicted man by nature, and being in a quarrel with someone was always wildly uncomfortable for him. A month passed, and Elaine still did not speak to him. Then Michael, in desperation, took a desperate step and put the question to his mother in a straightforward way. Either she accepts the whole situation as it is, or he leaves home. "Your weasel Valentine will never set foot in my house. She'll only set foot on this threshold over my dead body," said the angry woman, as if she were cut off. "She's got you wrapped up, and now she wants to take what your father and I sweated and bled for in our house. But I won't let her do that." Meanwhile, Michael and Valentina began to prepare for their marriage. They still met every day. More than once, Michael accompanied his bride to the women's center. It seemed to the young man that the belly of his beloved was growing by leaps and bounds. Elaine, on the other hand, had been on the defensive until one of her wise companions, that same professor of Oriental Studies, had pointed out to her the future prospects that were far from rosy. "You're going to lose your son, Elaine, if you keep this up," she said. "In your situation, it's best to accept it, and then we'll see. Life will put everything in its place. After all, no one canceled the divorce. One day your Michael will see the light and find an equal." Elena, though a willful person, was far from stupid. She eventually heeded her friend's advice and began to build bridges. But still, she flatly refused to live with Valentina, preferring to rent them an apartment. The wedding day was approaching. Art historian, and could not leave her only son without a celebration. "After all, this is the first time my little blood is getting married, and, God willing, not the last," she thought. Elena arranged the wedding, bought her son an expensive suit, and Valentina a wedding gown, which the bride absolutely did not like. She, like all girls, had dreamed of a white wedding dress since childhood, but her future mother-in-law gifted her with an austere white suit. Not accustomed to wearing such things, Valentina felt out of place, as if she were not a bride, but some office worker. Nevertheless, Valentina did wear a suit to the wedding to please her mother-in-law. At the wedding, the girl was shy from the fact that there were important strangers around, all professors in bright science. All the guests on the groom's side looked at the bride somewhat haughtily and on Elena with frank sympathy. On Valentina's side, there was only one girlfriend from high school. Aunt Evelyn didn't come to the wedding for some reason. Maybe she was embarrassed. Maybe she was just jealous of her niece's happiness. Although Elaine helped the newlyweds financially, they were still woefully short of money. But Michael dared not ask his mother for more. It was embarrassing enough. So the newlyweds had to somehow get out of it. Valentina could not renovate during the late pregnancy. It was hard with a big belly, her knees hurt a lot, and the doctor forbade physical activity. But the expectant mother was not accustomed to sitting idly by. Now I found a job knitting handmade dolls at home. It brought a small but still income. Michael tried to earn something too, working part-time in his spare time. At the very least, they somehow managed to make ends meet. They even managed to save up for a stroller for the unborn child. In due time, Valentina gave birth to a boy, pretty and white-haired like his father. It wasn't until her grandson Grayson came along that Elaine's heart softened. But every time she came to visit her son's family, she unceremoniously peered into pots in the kitchen and ran her hand over the furniture. Unfortunately for her, there was never anything to complain about. Valentina was an excellent hostess. A hearty dinner was always on the stove. The house was always clean. Her husband was fed, their clothes were freshly laundered and ironed, and their child was healthy and well-groomed. What more could she ask for? But Elaine still wrinkled her nose and complained to her friends about her daughter-in-law at every opportunity. "This Valentina is a redneck," she sighed. "She only finished school. She doesn't read books. What can we talk to her about?" The woman preferred to remain silent about the harmony and understanding in her son's family. But about her grandson Grayson, she could talk for hours. Everything about that boy delighted her. What luck that he went into our breed, she rejoiced. Life went on as usual. Michael, having received his master's degree from his university, decided to continue his studies and receive his doctorate. Grayson grew up and went to kindergarten. Valentina went to work. She earned a decent wage, which enabled the family to make a living. It was later that Michael would become a doctor of science, write scientific papers and books, receiving a solid royalty. In the meantime, Valentina supported them all. But that, too, Elaine preferred not to notice. Over time, Michael became a highly respected and well-known figure in scientific circles. He had his own department at the Institute. He was often invited on radio and television. He was written about in scientific newspapers and magazines. He often traveled around the country and abroad to all sorts of symposiums, seminars, and conferences. Sometimes Valentina would travel with him. Over the years, he had become a financial manager and worked in a chain of supermarkets. It would seem that in the meantime, Elena should have come to terms with the choice of her son, but it wasn't to be. The woman continued to judge her daughter-in-law. Just imagine. Aside from her village background and complete lack of intelligence, Valentina has not made any career. She sits in a dusty office and counts how much sausage and cheese was sold. Tell me, does my only, my favorite, my cleverest son deserve such a wife? She wondered in frequent conversations with her friends. She was still silent about the fact that Valentina ran to her house 3 times a week after work to clean up and bring those notorious cheeses and sausages. "A commoner," Eleni said, and sighed heavily. And she flatly refused to admit that her son Michael had been unreservedly happy with a commoner for so many years. Michael and Valentina really did live soul to soul. It seemed to them that everything in their family was perfect, and so the news that their only son was a drug addict, it sounded like a bolt from a clear sky. The terrible truth was revealed by chance, when a vigilant resident of an apartment building next door was taking out the trash and saw suspicious young men on the landing who were in an inadequate state. Next to them lay used syringes. The disturbed woman immediately called the police. The police officers arrived and took the addicts to the police station, where they later called Grayson's parents. He was almost 19 years old at the time, attending law school and planning to become a lawyer. Professors accommodated the professor's son for a long time and turned a blind eye to his absences and failed tests and assignments. But eventually their patience snapped and Grayson was kicked out of the school. How did this happen? How could my boy get hooked on drugs? How could Michael and I have missed this moment? Valentina was tearing her hair out in despair. She was wildly terrified. She was also fueled by the elderly Elaine, who had become even more grumpy and intolerable over the years. And I knew this would happen. It's not surprising. It's Valentina's genes. Daddy's a drunk, brother's in jail. Nice family, I'll give you that. You don't get oranges from an aspen tree. And the spoiled heredity of her alcoholic father made itself felt. Her mother-in-law liked to reproach her daughter-in-law. "Mom, stop it. It was both Valentina's and my fault. We didn't look hard enough," Michael defended his wife every time. Valentina spoiled him. Expensive things, equipment, any whim she fulfilled at his first request. Too much was allowed to the boy. That's the result, his grandmother kept saying. Mom, please don't blame anyone. We should be thinking about how to save Grayson right now and not looking for someone to blame, Michael said reasonably. And I'm going to blame her because she's a criminal. She has failed to raise an only child because she is careless and irresponsible. The most eloquent testimony to this is her allegedly unplanned pregnancy. This could never happen to me, stated the elderly woman. The spouses did not argue with her. They were too busy trying to save their son. Wherever they treated him, they went to all drug treatment centers and clinics, to psychiatric hospitals, and there were all kinds of psychics, clairvoyants, healers, magicians, and hypnotists. Sometimes all these manipulations gave positive results. I don't want to live like this anymore, Grayson confessed to his parents. Just thinking about dope is unbearable. It's like I'm a slave to those damn drugs. I promise you that I'll get better and live a healthier life. I'll go back to law school and finish my studies. And Michael and Valentina believed their child's vows. Or rather, they wanted very much to believe in them always, and supported him in everything. They found him some new activities, suggested various hobbies. But he quickly lost interest. A month or two would go by. Grayson would break down and everything started all over again. Again, doctors, clinics, drips. Doctors wouldn't make any predictions. They just took him out of his difficult condition, that's all. In front of his parents' eyes during withdrawal, their son was turning from a human being into a real monster. He demanded money, and if he didn't get what he wanted, he would curse and even raise his hand against his mother or father. To buy a dose, he began stealing money from the house, sometimes valuables. Unfortunate Valentina was fighting like a fish against ice, searching for new methods, better specialists, drugs. And Michael could not believe that he, a respected man, had such a good-for-nothing son. I work in education, sowing in the minds of young people reasonable, good, eternal, and I missed my own son. He sighed heavily. Now, Michael was ashamed to lift his head and look people in the eye, and the couple had no one to share this pain with. The exhausting fight for a healthy lifestyle lasted almost 3 years. During that time, Valentina and Michael lived their lives on a powder keg. The couple prayed and hoped to save their son and made every attempt to free him from the clutches of addiction. But, alas, they were not able to. The drugs won. And one day, the thing the couple feared would happen. Their Grayson took a lethal dose and died of an overdose. Valentina had a bad memory of her son's funeral. At the time, Michael was in charge of all the arrangements. They say trouble comes in bunches. And now, after Grayson's death, there was a new crisis. Elena had a stroke after her grandson tragically passed away. The elderly woman was paralyzed. She could no longer speak, move, or take care of herself. Care for her seriously ill mother-in-law fell on Valentina's shoulders. She had to quit her job and dedicate herself entirely to the care of her mother. Every day, Valentina meekly washed, dressed, ironed, fed the woman who had disliked her all her life and scolded her at every opportunity. Are you tired? Is it hard for you and your mom? Michael asked sympathetically on his way home from work. Elena had gained a lot of weight in recent years, and it was really physically difficult to carry her. What are you? It's okay. Valentina smiled wryly, barely able to stand on her feet from exhaustion. She had been accustomed since childhood to endure all the vicissitudes of life, and it was not in her habit to complain. A year later, Elena died in the arms of her undesirable daughter-in-law. Such was the irony of fate. Michael found solace in his work and was absorbed in scientific pursuits. He was constantly traveling on business trips and was now home infrequently. Her husband withdrew from Valentina, but she did not blame him for that. She knew that everyone goes through the loss of loved ones in their own way. Michael preferred to keep quiet about everything that concerned Grayson. She, on the other hand, wanted to talk about him all the time, remembering how he'd fallen out of a tree when he was 6, how he'd brought home a flea-infested kitten in 2nd grade, how he'd learned to ride a bike, how he'd first fallen in love with the girl next door, a very beautiful but fussy girl. All of this remained in some other life of happiness, fullness, volume. For what, and more importantly, for whom does she live now? Who does she live now? Who does she care about? Her son is gone. She has no grandchildren. What then is the meaning of life? At one point, Valentina even thought about adoption. What if I suggested that Michael get custody of some abandoned child with a difficult fate, she pondered. For a long time the woman wanted to discuss this serious step with her husband, but she was still hesitant. And soon she herself gave up her idea. After all, a child is not a toy in a store. You can't put it back on the shelf if you don't like it. Besides, it's a big lottery. What with Elena being right and Grayson really being ruined by his maternal grandfather's bad genes, Valentina suggested. Where's the guarantee that an adopted child from an orphanage will have good heredity? To put it bluntly, the chances are slim. To distract herself and keep herself busy, Valentina went back to her old job. 5 years passed. Life went on unhurriedly and joylessly. One Valentine's Day was succeeded by another, so similar to the previous one. Grief always comes suddenly. That winter morning she was on her way to work when the phone rang. "Is this Valentina?" The unfamiliar male voice on the other end of the line asked. "Yes, I'm listening to you," she replied. "I'm very sorry about that. But the fact is that your husband died tonight in a car accident. We're very sorry for your loss," said the same monotone male voice. "Your husband's body is in the city morgue. I'll text you the address." Valentina slowly sank into a chair. "Wait, I don't understand anything. Are you saying that Michael is dead?" Valentina couldn't believe her ears. "Alas, it is," they answered on the other end of the line. "But there must be some mistake," Valentina replied, without a shadow of doubt. "My husband is at a symposium in Hungary. He can't possibly be in our city. Besides, his car is parked outside our window. So you must have made a mistake. I understand that you are in shock. So I'll say it again. Your husband, Michael, was in a car accident. It was the fault of the driver who fell asleep, and his truck flew straight into the oncoming lane of the car with your husband. As a result, all the passengers of the car died before the ambulance arrived," clarified the interlocutor. "All the passengers," Valentina said. "So you're saying there were other people in the car?" "Yes, your husband wasn't alone," the stranger replied. "But that's not what we're talking about now. You need to go to the morgue to identify the body, and you need to do it as soon as possible." Valentina hung up. The thoughts in her head were confused. What was this nonsense? Well, how could Michael be here when he called me just yesterday from Hungary? Why would he lie to me about the symposium and act out this whole comedy? Valentina tried several times to call her husband on his cell phone, but it was disconnected. Then she decided to call the hotel directly, but she couldn't remember which one her husband was staying at this time, and it was stupid to call all the hotels in a row. This is some kind of mistake, absurd, just the ravings of a madman. It just can't be. I will now be able to see for myself that the body of the man who died in the accident belongs to a complete stranger, Valentina told herself as she headed for the morgue. But unfortunately, she did identify the dead man as her husband. How is this possible? Valentina was indignant when the shock of realizing what had happened had passed. Had Michael deceived me and really wasn't going anywhere? But for what? It's a lie. Cherchez la femme, as the French say. The second body, which belonged to a woman, Valentina also saw, and she immediately recognized the deceased. It was Lucia, her husband's assistant. She had once been his student and had shown great promise. "This girl is very talented," Michael said of her. but she comes from a very poor family. Her father is gone and her mother is sick all the time. Lucia had to go to school, and all she could think of was how to earn extra money to buy medicine for her mother. That little girl's fate reminded Valentina in some ways of her own. And so she didn't mind that Michael helped her out from time to time, financially too. Valentina saw nothing wrong with her husband wanting to somehow support Lucia. He had lost his only son and had decided to take care of a young, gifted girl. What was wrong with that? Michael guided her, prompted her, mentored her. Later, when Lucia got her degree, he took her to work for him. So there was nothing surprising about the fact that Michael and his protege were together in the car. Valentina saw nothing. What confused her was something else. Why did my husband lie to me about the symposium? And where were he and Lucia going at this late hour? She did not understand. The idea that Michael had cheated on her seemed unbelievable. In all the years of marriage, he had never given her the slightest reason to doubt him. What was there to say? He idolized her. Besides, her husband was a grateful man, and he could not have betrayed his wife after all the good she had done for him. It wasn't in his character at all. In fact, they had always trusted each other. So Valentina could not believe in his infidelity and built the most extraordinary theories, but could not shed any light on this mysterious story. For 40 days she could not rest. Immersed in her thoughts, Valentina searched through the cemetery. She saw the familiar headstone. And then the woman saw 2 lonely figures next to a snow-covered grave of her relatives. One was female and rather frail, and the other small, clearly belonging to a child. Who could it be? Valentina wondered and began to go over all her acquaintances in her mind. As she came closer, she was able to make out a woman in a long green coat and a white shawl, and a boy of about 5 or 6 in a blue jacket and a bright hat with a big pom-pom. He was talking loudly, gesticulating vigorously, and lisping a little. "Good afternoon," said Valentina. The woman in the green coat flinched and turned around. She was 20 years older than Valentina. There was a look of consternation on her face, as if she'd seen a ghost, not a person. "Rudy, we have to go," the stranger said to the boy, gripping his hand tightly. She acted very fidgety and tried not to meet Valentina's gaze. The baby, on the other hand, when he turned around, immediately smiled openly at Valentina, exposing a mouth with missing front teeth. The woman's heart froze in that moment. The child looked exactly like her husband, and also like Grayson as a child. The resemblance was striking. A breed, a satisfied Elaine would nod. Valentina thought to herself for some reason. "Hurry up, Rudy," the elderly woman grudgingly muttered, turning to the boy. "But I want some more time with my daddy." The baby stomped his foot, trying to wrench his hand away. "I said, let's go," the woman repeated in a tone that could not be objected to, and she dragged the boy toward the exit. Valentina stared dumbfoundedly after them. What did that little guy just say? Seemed to be with Daddy, or did I mishear that? She felt dizzy. And in order not to fall, she sat down on the bench. Who is this boy, and who did he call Daddy? My spouse. Or maybe a son, had Grayson left an heir? Valentina's questions whirled like a merry-go-round. But why didn't I know anything about it until now? All her assumptions seemed to be something fantastic. After catching her breath, Valentina realized, "Why am I scattered here, you fool?" She scolded herself. "I've got to catch up with them and ask them everything." Valentina rushed to the exit, but not in time. The woman in the green coat and the boy got into a car right in front of her and drove away. All night Valentina could not sleep. She wondered who she had seen today at the cemetery. The boy's age might well have been Grayson's son, but she recalled no evidence that her son had been surrounded by girls lately. And if there had been, they had been drug addicts like himself. Could one of the junkies have given birth to Grayson's child? If so, where to find her now? Could the boy be Michael's illegitimate son? That was a possibility Valentine hadn't discounted either. In the morning, she mustered up the courage to call an old friend of her husband's, the same one who had long ago given him the bottle of red wine that had begun her affair with Michael. During his lifetime, Michael had been quite close to him, and he might have been aware of his secrets. Valentina was determined, by all means, to get to the bottom of the truth, however bitter it might be. But her companion remained silent. Maybe he did not want to give up his dead friend, and maybe he really did not know his secrets. 3 days later, Valentina's doorbell rang. She wasn't expecting anyone and wondered who it could be. When Valentina looked through the peephole, she almost cried out in surprise. On the other side of the door stood an elderly woman in a green coat. "Hello, you don't know me, but we've met recently," said the guest as the hostess made the door. "Yes, at the cemetery. I remember you. You were with a little boy," Valentina confirmed. "That's right. My name is Greta," the woman introduced herself, "and I have a serious conversation to have with you." The woman invited Greta in. She took off her coat, and the hostess revealed the excessive thinness of the elderly woman. "To what do we owe the pleasure of your visit?" Valentina asked. "Perhaps we'd better sit down," Greta said. "It's not an easy conversation for either of us." "Well then, let's go," said Valentina. As the women sat at the table opposite each other, the uninvited guest began her story. "You see, I'm Lucia's mother," she said, "the one who worked with Michael. I want you to know that I am very grateful to your late husband. He was a wonderful man. I will thank him for everything he did for my daughter for the rest of my life. He was a golden man. And what a clever man. What a clever man. What a bright head. My sincerest condolences. His passing is an irreplaceable loss for all of us, including science." "Thank you," Valentina nodded. "And you, in turn, accept mine. You lost your daughter, didn't you?" "Yes," Greta nodded. "She was my only child. You know, I hadn't been able to give birth for a long time, desperate for the joy of motherhood. My marriage had fallen apart because of childlessness. My husband called me a wastrel and left me for someone else. I never remarried. Almost 40 years old, when I had given up hope, God sent me a daughter. She was born as a result of a fleeting holiday romance. Amazing, really. 8 years with my legal husband, did not get pregnant. And then just one passionate night, and then just one passionate night. And here's the result. Don't make me out to be promiscuous. It's not that at all. It's just that that man was so charming, so persistent. He made me believe in love. I fell under his disarming charm. It's so easy to lose your head under the sound of the surf, especially when you're not young anymore. And this may be your last chance to find a woman's happiness. However, as you've probably already guessed, the romance didn't work out. My date ran away without saying goodbye. I then found out that he was married. However, I do not hold it against him. After all, he gave me not just happy moments. He gave me the meaning of life, my unexpected joy. I named my daughter Lucia because she really was the light in the window for me. I'm from an orphanage myself, and I don't have any family. So I raised my daughter on my own without anyone else's help. And to be honest, it wasn't easy. Admittedly, we lived hard, almost on the brink of poverty. It was especially hard when I got sick. We were barely able to make ends meet. After all, the lion's share of money was spent on medicines. But that all changed when Michael came into Lucia's life. From then on, things got better. I thought my daughter would have a career in science, but she surprised me with the news that she was pregnant. I certainly dreamed of becoming a grandmother someday, but I didn't think it would all happen so quickly. She was only 19 at the time. Lucia hid the name of the baby's father at first. I guessed, but I kept quiet. It wasn't until after the birth that my daughter told me Michael was Rudy's father. But it only took one look at the boy to know whose son he was. There was no need for DNA testing. You knew right away, didn't you? Valentina was silent. Listening to this strangest confession hurt her. After all, Lucia was a frequent visitor in their home. Valentina treated her like a daughter. As it turned out, her husband had feelings for her that were far from fatherly. Valentine wanted to cover her ears, but she had to hear the whole story and find out what was going on, or else she would puzzle the rest of her life. Believe me, I'm not comfortable telling you all this, Greta continued, as if she could read Valentina's thoughts. Like I said, my ex-husband cheated on me too, and I know what betrayal is, how painful it is. Then why did you come here and start all this unpleasant conversation? Valentina asked dryly. I would never do that. I assure you my mission is unenviable. I assure you my mission is unenviable. I only came to see you for the sake of Rudy's future. At the cemetery, when we first saw each other, I was very distracted. I wasn't sure what to do. And now I'm sitting across from you saying all this. And I still don't know if I'm doing the right thing. But you should know that I was forced to take this step by some weighty circumstances, Greta confessed. What kind of things? The hostess inquired. The thing is, I've been seriously ill for a long time, said the guest, sighing heavily. But the disease is progressing, and it is no longer possible to fight it. My body is exhausted. It simply no longer has the strength to resist. I don't have long to live, a couple of months at most. And now, I'm worried about what will happen to my grandson after I die. The situation is not easy. His mother is dead, his father is also in the grave, and the boy has no other relatives besides me. He will be left alone in the world and will go straight to an orphanage. I've seen firsthand how difficult it is there. I wouldn't wish the enemy to live through the humiliation and deprivation, the cruelty I had experienced. That was not the fate I wanted for Rudy. What does that have to do with me? Valentina was surprised, not understanding what she was getting at. I thought you could take him with you if you wanted to, Greta said quietly. Me? The hostess couldn't believe her ears. Can you even hear yourself? You are a very good woman. I know that from what Michael told me. He always said his wife was an amazing soul. Then why did he cheat on me, who was so wonderful? Valentina grinned bitterly. I don't think Michael loved my daughter. Not as much as he loved you, anyway. He just hid in his relationship with her, like an ostrich that buries its head in the sand when it is afraid. Lucia became his safe haven, his sanctuary, where he could take refuge for a while and regain his strength. Beside her, he did not think about problems in his family. It was as if he was immersed in another reality, temporarily escaping his problems and hardships. Maybe with my daughter, he was just drowning out the pain for his son, Greta surmised. Why didn't I dull my pain in someone else's arms? Valentina exclaimed. Tears glistened in her eyes. This fact only underscores what an honest and decent man you are, Greta remarked. That's why I want you to take care of my grandson. Do you really want me to adopt Rudy? Valentina said. You've got to be kidding me. Unfortunately, I'm not in the mood for jokes right now, answered Greta. Your financial situation is quite stable, and I'm sure that the child will not be a burden on you. Perhaps on the contrary, it will help you. After all, as far as I know, you're alone in the world now too. Valentina stared at her guest, trying to digest everything she had just said. I'm not rushing you or asking you to give an answer right now. I understand that this case is very complicated and quite delicate. You just buried your husband, and here I am with my request. You need to think it over. Weigh it up, calculate it, and then make the right decision. But I beg you, show mercy to the poor orphan. You alone can save him. I'm leaving now, but I'll call you tomorrow night. With these words, Greta hurriedly left the professor's apartment, leaving Valentina utterly baffled. It was time to admit that her husband Michael was leading a double life. How could you do this to me? She wept as she looked at the portrait of her husband. There was, of course, no answer. But that night she dreamt of her dead husband. He was on his knees, repenting and begging forgiveness. She awoke when dawn barely broke. The day would be a trying one. She would have to make the ultimate decision, one that would change not only her life, but also the life of the little man who had her husband's blood in his veins. Rudy was Michael's son. She could see that with the naked eye. But this innocent little boy was a stranger to her Valentine. He had nothing to do with her. What would she think of every time she looked at the blond, skinny boy? Would he be a constant reminder of her husband's infidelity? Yes. And will I be able to bring up a decent man? Valentina pondered. After all, she had lost her own son. On the other hand, Greta was right. She was no less lonely than the orphan Rudy. What kind of life lay ahead of her? Cold, long nights, empty days, holidays all alone. No one to drink coffee with, no one to talk to. In the evening, over a cup of tea, Valentina wandered through the labyrinth of her thoughts and, like Theseus from an ancient Greek myth, could not find her way out. And how do I explain this boy's appearance to acquaintances, colleagues, neighbors? She wondered. I would have to tell the truth. I do not want to shake my dirty laundry in front of the people. They will immediately begin gossip, crawl dirty gossip, all, and will talk about how all respected. Scientist treacherously cheated legitimate wife with his young student. Detractors would be rubbing their hands, because these jealous only give them a reason. They would mix the name of the late professor with mud. There were a great many nuances. Valentina was no longer young herself. And here was a child, a preschooler to boot. He would require a lot of attention and energy. He will have to be assigned to kindergarten, then to school to check homework, to go to meetings. Is she ready for all this fuss? She has had her fair share of trials. Has she not earned a peaceful old age? But a few years ago she herself thought about adoption, and now a boy, one might say, is on her doorstep. No need to look for anyone, to choose, as if a gift in a store, to think about some kind of genetics. She knew perfectly well who Rudy's father was and who his mother was, and she had even met her grandmother in person. Valentina spent the whole day in agonizing contemplation. No, this is all some stupid idea. I should have said no to Greta in the first place. Michael made a mess, so why do I have to clean it up? It's not a joke. After all, a little kid, that's a big responsibility. Children are often sick, naughty, mischievous, naughty. And to go all this way again, I'm not ready, concluded Valentina. But the thought that somewhere in the world will run a continuation of her still fervently loved spouse did not give the woman peace. How am I going to live with the idea of Grayson's brother being raised in an orphanage because of me? Valentina asked herself. What would my son think of me? In the evening, when Greta called, Valentina told her that she agreed to adopt the boy. We cannot allow the son of such a distinguished scientist to live in an orphanage, she said firmly. Weeks of running around all kinds of bureaucratic offices and offices followed. Valentina was in a hurry. She had to get all the paperwork done while Greta was still alive. Lucy's mother struggled on, though it was not easy for her. Day by day, she grew worse and worse. She was literally melting before her eyes. She grew weaker, and 2 months after their first meeting, the woman passed away. That day, Valentina brought Rudy home with her. They had seen each other many times before, and the boy had grown accustomed to her. But this was the first time he had been in his father's apartment. Why is my dad here? The first thing he asked when he saw Michael's portrait on the wall. Your dad lived here and worked hard. Do you see how big his library is? There are a lot of books, and some of them your father wrote himself. Valentina said proudly. Can you read them to me? Are there dragon tales in there? The little boy asked naively. No. Valentina smiled affectionately. There are no tales about dragons, but believe me, there are no less interesting things. I'll teach you to read, and one day you'll see for yourself. And when you grow up, you'll learn, become a great scholar, and carry on your father's work. You're going to be my mother now, aren't you? Rudy asked, looking inquiringly into Valentina's eyes. It appears so, the woman nodded affirmatively. But you're old. I want my mother, Lucia. She's beautiful and young. The boy whimpered softly, and Valentina realized that things were not going to be so rosy and that there would be a lot of hardships and difficulties ahead of her. So they began to live together. During the first year, Valentina had a lot to remember, including how to cook porridge, how to skate, and how to don children's pantyhose. Valentina tried to surround the boy with love and care, which, as it turned out, had more than accumulated in her heart. She suddenly awakened feelings of motherhood, of which she had long forgotten. Life changed dramatically. Professor's empty apartment was filled with happiness, children's laughter, the smell of baked goods, and a lot of toys scattered on the floor. Valentina and Rudy spent all their free time together, going to amusement parks, the circus, and the theater. The boy grew up to be intelligent and unusually curious and gifted. He attended karate and drawing classes, went to music school and swimming, and no matter what he undertook, he invariably became the best of the best. And what was the merit of this white-haired inheritance that fell on my head? Valentina wondered, looking at her adopted son. She called him her unwanted joy. Perhaps some may find it strange, but she, over time, somehow evaporated resentment against her husband. On the contrary, she was even now very grateful for his newfound happiness and meaning of life. Valentina could no longer imagine how she could live without this inquisitive boy. On Rudy's 7th birthday, Valentina gave him a Pomeranian Spitz. She knew how long the boy had dreamed of having the dog, and how happy he was now to see the wagging tail in front of him. "Thank you, Mummy," Rudy shouted, cradling his four-legged friend in his arms and gasping with delight. And Valentina couldn't hold back tears of joy. It was the first time he had ever called her mother. And then she had a strong conviction that she would be able to overcome all difficulties, and everything would be all right with her and Rudy.